Welcome to today's DRK-12 Solicitation webinar. I'm Catherine McCulloch from Cadre, the DRK-12 Resource Center. We're happy to have program officers Joan Walker, Jennifer Noll, and Robert Ochsendorf here presenting and answering your proposal questions. And since all attendees are muted today, we ask that you submit questions for NSF by writing them in the Q&A window. The Q&A window, chat box, and closed captioning options can all be accessed at the bottom of your Zoom window. And please use the chat box not only to introduce yourself, but to let us know if you need help with any technical issues throughout the webinar. Again, questions for our presenters should be entered in the Q&A window, please. Today's webinar focuses on the merit review criteria, program strands, and project types. If you have technical questions, please hold them for the next webinar. And we encourage you to email NSF about project-specific questions rather than asking them here, and we'll put the address in the chat box. Finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and the slides and recording will be sent to registrants and posted on the Cadre website, where we have resources for proposal development, implementing projects, and information about past and currently funded DRK-12 projects. So we hope you'll explore that site. And with that, let's get started. Jan, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. If you're watching a recording of this, we're so glad you're here. If you're live, thanks for making time for this today. I will draw attention to make sure everyone knows we have a new solicitation out, and that an important fact to note right up front is that the submission deadline is this November 8, 2023. All right, this information session has two aims. As Catherine just said, we really want to focus on the DRK-12 program's aims and project expectations, not technical issues or budget preparation. And I also want to remind you about several resources that are available to you. Primarily, the outreach arm for our program is Cadre. Thank you, Cadre, today for your support with this webinar and with our other outreach sessions for this summer. Today's interactive webinar focuses on the intellectual content of a proposal. There's another webinar next Tuesday where we will answer questions about technical support. In August, we have two program officer office hour sessions where you can come and ask more tailored questions about your proposals. And of course, you can send a one-page concept paper or project summary to us anytime before October 8th for feedback. Cadre has a lot of great additional resources. There's the proposal toolkit, a proposal development timeline, other resources available on their website. I will encourage you, if you haven't already, to subscribe for announcements so you can receive the latest information when Cadre pushes it out on our behalf. So, in a recorded information session that I created and that Cadre has posted, that session really dug a little bit deeper into 5 important changes from the prior solicitation. So if you are curious about that material, we'll of course take your questions about it today, but you can hear a description of these changes in that recorded information session. If you haven't accessed it already, Cadre can direct you to that. You can get to that from their website. I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to use your network to help us recruit reviewers for our competition in the fall. If you are interested in serving as a reviewer, here's what we need. You can write to our program inbox and include a sketch of your expertise and a CV. There are benefits to you. There are benefits to us, and we particularly want to invite practitioners, teachers, school leaders, other professionals in the formal education space to be part of our scientific review process. But if you are going to be a member of a project as senior personnel, you are not eligible and will be screened out of our reviewer pool, but we really want your help in spreading the word for our need for reviewers, especially practitioners. All right. Just if you're new to DRK-12 and to NSF STEM Education Directorate, our mission is to develop a diverse and well-prepared STEM workforce and a STEM literate public. And we do that by supporting research and development in STEM education. There are 3 general bins or buckets for ideas, one being STEM learning and learning environments, another focused on broadening participation, and then finally STEM professional workforce development. Jen is going to talk a bit more specifically about how DRK-12 fits into this mission. So I'm going to turn it over to her now.
Thank you, Joan. I'm going to give a few slides with some high-level overview of the DRK-12 program. And first, just to mention how unique and important this program is at NSF. It is the only program whose primary purpose is to support research and development at the pre-K through 12 level in formal education in all areas of STEM. And I know we've seen some unique challenges since COVID. There were already challenges in pre-K through 12 STEM education, and since COVID, many more challenges. So we are really interested in proposals that are helping us address some of these immediate challenges facing pre-K through 12 STEM education. Work that can anticipate radically different structures and functions of pre-K through 12 teaching and learning. Proposals should really be able to demonstrate an understanding of the day-to-day work of educators in formal contexts, the talents and needs of our diverse student population, their communities, as well as national, state, and district priorities. Proposals that advance opportunities for all pre-K through 12 students and teachers in order to develop their STEM talent. You can advance to the next slide, Joan, thanks. So a primary goal for DRK-12 is research and development, again, that enhances all pre-K through 12 teachers and their students opportunities to engage in high quality STEM learning experiences. There are three primary objectives for this program. The first is to build knowledge about how to develop pre-K through 12 students and teachers STEM content knowledge, their practices, their skills. Another objective is to support collaborative partnerships among STEM education researchers and STEM education practitioners and school leaders. And then third is to build a field of STEM education through synthesis and development of novel and robust assessments for teachers and student learning, engagement, and skills. Outcomes for work in DRK-12 should include evidence-based products and methods that could be used by others to support success of all teachers and students. So examples of that might be curriculum materials, theoretical frameworks, like research tools or teaching tools, models of collaboration, those kinds of things. So this is going to be a quick high-level overview, and then some of the other slides are going to go into more details on this, because it can be a little bit confusing when you're first looking through the solicitation in terms of these various pieces. So the new solicitation has just two strands, a teaching strand and a learning strand. And certainly there's a lot of overlap between these. There's synergy between teaching and learning, but we really want you to think about what are your primary goals, what are your primary objectives and research questions, and identify the strand that's most consistent with those. So are your questions primarily focused on teacher development, for example, or are they primarily focused on student learning or student development in some kind of way? And so pick the strand that best fits your objectives. And then in terms of the project types, we have several research project types. Those could be exploratory, design and development, impact, implementation and improvement, and measurement and assessment. They can be with either strand. So any one of those project types can go with the teaching or learning strand, as well as any of the funding levels. So there are 3 funding levels for those project types, 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years. And what you really want to make sure you do is that you're asking for the funding level that's appropriate for, again, the goals and work of your project, the expertise of the team that's working on the project in terms of who the collaborators are and how you're going to all work together to get the work done. And so it should be consistent through there. So again, you can mix and match any one of those. We also have a few other project types, syntheses and synthesis projects or synthesis projects, 600,000 for 3 years. Again, that could be in teaching or learning. We have a new partnership development project type, and that's up to 100K for 1 year. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. And then workshops and conferences, and those have actually been increased to 200,000, and we're trying to encourage more of those. So we'll get into more details around these, but the main thing to take away is your funding levels are not tied to project types or strands, and that you really need to think about your aims and scopes of your proposed work as you're considering the various pieces here, strand, project type, and funding level. Oh, did I go through the teaching? Yeah, I think I highlighted this a little bit. So if there's any questions, I can take those now.
See some questions in the chat. I answered one of them. I see activity here. I don't see anything specific about this portion of the webinar. Just to let everyone know that we chunk the information, and at each portion at the end of it, we're creating opportunities to ask questions. Of course, you might have questions at the end, and we'll have time for that. So if there are no questions about this material right now, we'll turn it over to Rob, and he'll walk us through the project types in more detail. Thanks, Jen.
Great, thanks, Jen and Joan. Multiple project types, as Jen mentioned, mostly there to help you frame your work and narrow the scope a bit. Many of these are consistent with the common guidelines for education research that came out, maybe 10 years ago now. But the first type I'll talk about is exploratory. And the idea here is to establish the basis before a design and development kind of project goal, right? So you're interested in maybe connections to or among the outcomes of interest related to some aspect of STEM teaching and learning. Research plans for exploratory studies must include a set of research questions, design issues addressed, study sample, data collection procedures, measures that you will use, and how you will analyze the data. In some cases, you could imagine that you might do an exploratory study with an existing data set, right? And that's fine too. You could collect new data, or you could lay out a plan to analyze an existing data set. That data set could be from another project. That data set could be one of the NCES data sets, nationally, which often are nationally representative samples of students. And so these are some of the things that you could do in an exploratory study. You should provide some evidence of the factors associated with the learning outcomes of interest. So that's exploratory. The next type is design and development. This is probably the most common type of proposal we receive. You should, in a design and development proposal, lay out the problem that you intend to address. Fractions learning has been struggling for these students for many years, and we have a new way of thinking about it. So justify the importance of the problem, describe how your approach or your idea is different from, or better than, or likely to be better than existing practice. And then why your ideas are likely to improve upon existing practice. And then you should lay out a strong theoretical and empirical justification for the proposed research, rationale for why these features of your program are expected to achieve the outcomes that you're interested in. Maybe it's a professional development approach in early science context, and you should lay out what are the key features of the professional development that you expect to lead to improved outcomes. So that's part of a well-articulated theory of change or logic model that you would want to include. You may have some early version of something in mind already developed or partly developed, or you may have not much of anything. But when you describe in your proposal, it needs to be clear like what exists and then what will be developed as part of the project. And the R&D here is this development process, right? So the solicitation goes into some detail about what a design and development research plan looks like, right? You have an idea about how professional development might work for early science teachers, and then you start doing it with those science teachers. And is it working the way you thought? What data are you collecting to tell you that it is working or not working? How are you analyzing that data? Is it observations? Is it teacher interviews? You know, what is the data? How is it being collected and analyzed to give you, the research team, feedback on what's working or not? And how are you involving teachers in this, right? How is it meeting their needs? These kinds of things. That's design and development. We're pretty specific in the solicitation about the kinds of details that should be expected in this proposal. Read that carefully. Talk about it with your team. You know, what does a strong research plan look like in this space? It should attend to all of these components that are in the solicitation. And yeah, you should be collecting some data on the outcome of interest along the way, right? Maybe not right in year one when you're focused on development and design, but maybe towards the end of the project, you do get a sense of you know, okay, this PD approach that we have for early science teachers, is it making a difference in their practice, in their perceptions of their practice, in their self-efficacy, in, you know, whatever the outcomes of interest are? You should begin to have some data probably towards the end of your design and development study. So that's design and development. Let's see some questions. Yeah, I wouldn't try to do a design and development and impact. You know, we do that to help you. In our experience, when you try to do too much, panelists, reviewers, it doesn't do well because it's competing project goals within a single proposal, and it's difficult. And yeah, if you have pilot study data on a particular approach or intervention, yeah, you're probably closer to design and development goal than exploratory. But yeah, I would need to see. We would, you know, submit to us a one-pager and we can talk about it. I'm trying to answer some of these questions live. Joan, can you remind me, can everybody see these questions, or yes?
I believe they can if they click on the Q&A function of the
okay.
Zoom. Yeah.
Great. Okay, great. Because I'm not repeating the question necessarily. Okay. And then let's move on to impact studies. In the chat, I noted that Cadre, I think it was Amy, maybe put in, or maybe it was Catherine, put in a link to read about impact projects. And Cadre has featured some currently funded impact studies, and that may be helpful to read, right? So the idea here is that you have a fully developed program, it exists, maybe somebody else developed it, maybe you were part of the development team, but now you want to understand with stronger evidence, does it work relative to some sort of counterfactual? Typically, these are more causal inference kinds of designs, and the solicitation is pretty clear on sort of what we expect in different kinds of impact study designs in terms of study sample, research questions, how you're attending to issues of fidelity, what your measures are, how you'll analyze the data, how you're dealing with multi-level data, nestedness in your data. These kinds of things are all important to spell out. Experimental designs and quasi-experimental designs are welcome here, but encourage you to reach out with your project ideas around impact studies. Implementation and improvement studies is the next one. The idea here is to strengthen the capacity of an organization to reliably produce valued STEM education outcomes for diverse groups of students. So you could imagine a situation where you're maybe partnering with a district to try to understand, better foster the delivery, rollout, uptake, implementation of some aspect of STEM education that is of value to the district and probably an interesting research context to consider. Clearly articulate the shared goal of this collaboration, the conceptual framework for implementation and improvement, and the methodological approach. So you could imagine here that you're collecting lots of different kinds of data in this kind of project where, yeah, maybe you're looking at district performance on a certain metric, but maybe you're also collecting quite qualitative data from teachers, from district leadership, observations in classrooms. Maybe you're even talking to parents and families. But these are the kinds of things that you might look at in an implementation and improvement study. Lots of needs in the field around that issue, which is great. Make sure that you have the research component of this clearly articulated. Okay, measurement and assessment. This is kind of a new project type, but this language has kind of always been in the solicitation. We've just pulled it into a project type to further highlight the needs that we have here around effective measurement, stronger measurement, whether it be in science or math or some other aspect of STEM learning. And the solicitation articulates what we expect in this particular project type. You'll probably want to think about your team a little bit differently, right? Domain expertise, maybe you're in the science space, great, but you probably also want to think about psychometric expertise, measurement expertise to be folded into your team as well. These proposals will typically be read by psychometricians, and so you want to make sure that you're attending to all the things that they would be looking for. Okay, trying to move along here. So synthesis type is, we've been getting more proposals in this space and we've been funding more. You can see on the NSF website, you can look at recently funded projects. I think Cadre may highlight some of these as well. These can be qualitative meta-synthesis or more quantitative meta-analysis. And you should come in with a clear question, articulate kind of the scope of the literature. What are we talking about here? How far back in the research will you go to analyze what has been published? How many, works of literature does that include roughly? You should do some scoping before you submit this or as part of the submission process. You should have some scoping review to get a sense of like, okay, this is the amount of prior research that exists that we are going to meta-analyze or meta-synthesize. This is consistent with one of our program aims, which is to build the field of STEM education by supporting knowledge synthesis and development of novel and robust assessments of teacher and student learning. So this is just yet another project type, but the methods around synthesis have gotten a lot stronger and more robust in the last 5 to 10 years, and just make sure that you attend to that. There's been a lot of interesting innovation around AI tools and machine learning to help folks carry out synthesis studies, and it's a really kind of exciting space if that is your area. Okay, pausing for questions. I see Chris's question, but Joan, do you see that one too?
I do, and I'll take that in my next section when I talk about partnership development, I think. Yeah, and just for the audience cannot see the Q&A, we can, so Cadre's helping us by putting their questions into the chat where they can be visible, just so Rob, Jen, and I know what participants can see and cannot see.
Okay, so great. There's a question here about, to be sure, ours is truly an innovation. One should be familiar with recent research. Can you name journals which publish STEM development findings? Sure, there are a host of STEM education related journals, K-12, of interest. They are usually specific to the domain of interest. So like math learning, their NCTM is the National Council of Teaching Mathematics, and they have a whole host of journals that they publish in the science domain. There's the Journal of Research and Science Teaching is just one example. You know, I think this is part of the work that goes into crafting a strong proposal, is understanding sort of what prior work has been done in your space and making sure that that's addressed and summarized. I hope that was helpful, Arthur. I don't know all the journals, but those are some of the ones off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks, Rob. I'm going to move ahead to talk about the new partnership development project type, and in that I'm going to answer Chris's question that has been put into the chat. The question being, I think this was from Jen's portion of the webinar where, or maybe something from the solicitation, where we're talking about the need for more of active two-way street between the research and practice community. So on the one hand, there's research knowledge that the research community generates. And I think there's, in my mind, I've come to make a distinction between research that is on teaching and research that is for teachers. So research that is for teachers would be bridging that gap between knowing something for its own sake, for its own beauty, for its own basic knowledge and fundamental power as information, and then mobilizing that information, transforming it and putting it into the hands of teachers who can apply it in a context and really enrich the science in a way that sort of like kicking the tires on the knowledge in the classroom setting. At the same time, the research agenda questions that the STEM research community pursues in education may not be the questions that practitioners need to have answered most urgently. And so we, in this new solicitation, we're trying to address these two communities' interests and talents and needs and build a bridge between them. And that bridge manifested itself in this partnership development project type. So what we're envisioning here, this mechanism is designed to either foster a partnership, the dialogue between communities, or deepen or help an existing partnership to pivot. So these proposals are shorter than the regular full-page research proposal. They're 8 pages, and in those 8 pages, we want to see you describe several things, such as how are the research and practitioner communities going to collaborate? What is the plan for co-designing or discussing the co-design? Proposals should articulate how and why they want to build a new partnership or expand an existing partnership in an endeavor that the DRK-12 program would support. What we want to see in these 8 pages is a clear plan for how researchers and practitioners are going to collaborate to ensure that both good science and good practice come are a consequence of this partnership development. There is no research component. There's not a requirement for this is not a planning grant, for example. We're not asking you to develop a draft proposal, but what we do, the one requirement for these is that you have some sort of formal mechanism. This could be external evaluation, an advisory board that helps you step outside the doing of the partnership development to talk about the process of putting the partnership together. So this is our new project type, 1 year, $100,000. And the foundation, again, for this is to establish that two-way street where researchers' interests in having their knowledge tried in the classroom it can be fulfilled, and where teachers and practitioners' concerns and questions can be incorporated into a research agenda. The other project type that we have that is not a research project type is workshops and conferences. And as Jen mentioned, we've doubled the budget here in order to signal our very strong interest in receiving these kinds of proposals. Another advantage of these kinds of proposals is they're not tied to the solicitation due date. So all of the other proposals are due on November 8th, but you can submit a workshop or conference proposal at any time across the year. We do encourage that you contact a program officer. You can write to our program inbox, or now you know Rob and Jen and I, and you can write to us to describe what your workshop or conference would focus on. Again, the focus could be in a particular area that would be of interest to the DRK-12 program. Here again, I'm going to ring the bell on reciprocal exchange of knowledge and expertise. We'd love to see some convenings that put together researchers and practitioners to create a dialogue around how they might develop, co-design a research agenda, where the gaps are, how they might be addressed, what it takes to fulfill a partnership that's effective in education research, other priorities that we might be interested in are societal grand challenges, such as climate change, equitable access to educational opportunities. And then in the wake of the CHIPS and Science Act, we're certainly interested in advanced and emerging technology space. So one last thing I would say about this is, when we might have in our mind our schema of what a conference is a 2 or 3 day event that's concentrated in time. And we really wanted to encourage the community to think a little bit more creatively and leverage what we know from learning science about distributed learning as a more effective model than mass practice. So maybe thinking of multi-stage convenings. Also, given our fluency now with remote and virtual meetings, thinking about maybe interleaving virtual and in-person components in a way that really leverage opportunities to prepare and to build on a cumulative knowledge base. So that is our workshops and conferences vision. And I'll check the chat to see if there are questions on this or the Q&A. And hearing none, seeing none, I will move along to Jen.
Thanks, Joan. I'm gonna go over a few slides around the merit review criteria and some advice in terms of things to consider as you're writing up your proposals and what reviewers and POs are looking for. So two primary pieces to any NSF proposal: the intellectual merit and the broader impact. So we're going to be looking to see, that's one of the criteria that all reviewers will be working with, is in what ways will this advance knowledge and understanding within the field or across different fields. And then the second piece that all reviewers are going to be looking at in your work is, will this benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes? And then in sort of thinking about the intellectual merit and broader impacts, considering how your proposed activities will explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts. when we're looking through the proposal, is there a coherent thread that you're weaving throughout the proposal? Is it well organized? Is it well reasoned? Do you have a sound rationale? How well tied and connected are your research questions, the activities you're proposing, to what you're going to collect for data, and how you're going to analyze that data? How is the team qualified to carry out the work? Sometimes we see proposals where we have expertise in one particular area, and the proposal is solid in that area, but they're sort of spanning disciplines, and then the other area they're expanding into is less detailed. And so bring someone in with that expertise, have them be part of your group, so that you can have that expertise throughout the set of activities and the work. And then, are the resources adequate for the PI and the collaborators to carry out the proposed activity? And then some other considerations for proposals, making sure that the proposal is in line with the program that you are submitting to. Are you able to answer the questions that are key to the goals and the objectives of that particular program? Is your work grounded in the relevant research literature? And Rob already talked about that as he was thinking about one of the questions in relation to the project types. And then have you addressed those merit review criteria? Also think about your writing. It is so helpful for us to understand and reviewers to understand who, what, when, where, why, how, and so what. Why are you doing this? If your writing has got a lot of jargon, if it's highly complicated, it doesn't help clarify your work. And remember that you're having reviewers from a variety of disciplines, right? So if you have a proposal that's focused on elementary age students and computer science, you may have an elementary school practitioner as a reviewer, as well as computer science educator, etc., on the panel. So you're trying to speak to the perspectives. You have expertise in different areas so that they can understand what you're talking about. I think an example goes a long way to illustrate your work. Folks want to understand, if you're working with teachers, what sort of activities are the teachers going to be engaged in? If you're working with students, what sort of activities are the students going to be engaged in? What is that going to look like? We often spend a lot of time kind of glossing over those details, and an example that highlights them can be really helpful for reviewers to sort of, oh yeah, I get it. I can see what this is about. And then organizationally, think about a reader-friendly format, how you're organizing headlines, and so forth, and then the tone and content of your work. And then there are some Dear Colleague letters. These are not new funding opportunities. Rather, they are bringing the field's attention to existing funding opportunities, and that you will accept proposals in those areas of interest. There's a few examples on this slide: knowledge mobilization, microelectronics education, artificial intelligence, and then research to improve STEM learning, teaching, and workforce development for persons with disabilities. I'll put the link to the strategic plan into the chat. That's another place to go to look at other particular areas, like data science education, computer science, those kinds of things that you might see in that strategic plan. Oh, thank you. Someone already did that, I think. And
Great.
that might be the end. I don't know if there's other questions that have come up.
Jen, I would like to chime in. You did a nice job of giving some tips for proposal writing. One that I particularly rely on as a reader of proposals is information-rich visuals. So you only have 15 pages to share your idea with us and with other readers. Proposals are dense, they're complex, they contain a lot of information. A visual representation, tables, figures, that helps the reader anchor their understanding of the key pieces of your proposal. If I see one of those, I find myself using it as a touchstone and coming back between the visual and the text, and those are really helpful guideposts.
I think that's a great point, Joan. Also, the other thing I wanted to say or to add on to that is just encouraging folks to have someone else, a colleague outside that is not on the research team, read your work, because I think it can help point to, say you have a visualization, but it's not making much sense to your colleague in an outside, that's outside of your work area, then it can give you insight into how you can develop that visualization more, or if your example isn't making things clear. So I think that's always really helpful.
Just some things in the chat to reiterate. There's a question about including links and supplemental materials in your proposal. There's really strict rules on that. So links are not allowed in the 15-page narrative, and then you can't include supplementary documents. That is a grounds for return without review. So it's got to fit within the 15-page limit, which is a challenge, but we're also trying to do you a favor and make it, it's a level playing field, right? Everybody's got the same 15 pages to make their case. There's a question here also about international collaborators. This is tricky. It's not forbidden. You can do it. Sometimes you just need to make the case that, it's still relevant to US STEM education, the collaborators that you're using. They can't be the prime applicant. There can be consultant arrangements and subawards perhaps, but they cannot be the prime submitter. The submitter to the NSF has to be a US-based institution. And there are some other things to think about as well, but those are generally what I would say about international collaborators.
Hey, we're in the wrap-up phase here, so if you've been holding a question, now is the time for you to ask it. But while we're waiting for other questions to come in, I'll just remind everyone that today is just one example of outreach on the new solicitation. Next Tuesday, if you have questions about proposal preparation and budgeting, that's your opportunity to interact with another team of program officers. Program officer office hours will take place in August, and you can submit your one-page concept paper anytime before October 8th, 1 month before the due date. And the address for our inbox is posted here. Again, Cadre is a great resource center. If you haven't subscribed for their announcements, please do that. And please check out the additional resources that are available there.
Thanks, Joan. A couple other things that are coming up. Question about switching institutions. This happens all the time. It's no big deal. If you switch institutions, there's ways that we can deal with that. A lot of times the award will move with you to the new institution, but you cross that bridge when we get there. First you have an award, then you have to move institutions. And yeah, so that's fine. A template for the one-pager, not necessarily. I think if you could, like a meaty paragraph on intellectual merit and a meaty paragraph on broader impacts. If you also want to include some more details about your methods and research questions, that's great too. Just gives us something to go on, I think, for the one-pager.
If I could jump in there, we really want to know what grade level, developmental level you're working with. What's your content area? What are your research questions? What's your grounding theory? We want to see that. If you have partners, we want to know who your partners are as well.
Great.
There was also a question on last year the emphasis on computational thinking, but I don't see it for this year. Does that mean the topic may be less considered this year? I don't think that's necessarily true. I think we're always trying to balance the portfolio. But if you have something on computational thinking, it's not going to be less valued. You know, if it's related to formal education, DRK-12, then it fits within the solicitation.
I'll take the question on, are there particular areas of study that do not draw many submissions and would be encouraged? I'm not sure, Tim, what you meant by areas of study. I'll try to answer it maybe with two different ways. So if you mean particular areas of STEM that we're interested in, I think the priorities that Jen pointed to when she referenced our Dear Colleague letters and the strategic plan, I think those are areas within STEM teaching and learning that the foundation is particularly interested in. If the other way of interpreting it is, are there certain types of studies that we would like to see more of that we don't? I think Rob pointed to this when he went through the project types. Synthesis studies in particular are real benefits. They're gifts to the field and help us advance knowledge. We'd like to see more of those, and he indicated we've been receiving more of them in the recent past. Those are real contributions because of their foundation for future inquiry. We also are clearly interested in researcher practitioner partnerships. That was the foundation for launching the partnership development project type. And I think in talking about conferences and workshops, we would like to receive more of those proposals as well. So I hope that answered the question. I see Jonathan's question about the partnership development. I don't anticipate that the pace for review for that would be different from the other project types. The question is there any chance that those are reviewed quicker than other project types to expedite the partnership work and allow for a new proposal? I would feel safest by saying that, you know, NSF we endeavor to turn around a response to a proposal within 6 months, and that would be the same stance I would take towards this partnership development as well. Rob, do you see the question from Angel?
Yeah, great question, Angel. Yes, it would. I think that's exactly what we mean. That's totally fine. Just a word of caution. Even though you say special ed students in 9th grade, that's still pretty heterogeneous group, right? So you may even further clarify that. Are you talking about students with learning disabilities, ADHD? Sometimes we get proposals as specific as we're looking at high school students on the autism spectrum, right? So I think you get what I mean, but yeah, what you describe is fine, but then you also want to be as specific as that in terms of like within that population. I hope that's helpful.
Right. Unless you have other questions, I'll again pause here to thank you for your attendance today. If you're listening on a recording, thank you for making time for this. We're so glad that you're interested in the DRK-12 program. Thank you so much for your interest, and we are open for business and looking forward to receiving your proposals, your one-page concept papers. We're happy to receive those and turn around feedback for you. Again, we really, if you choose not to submit something this fall, we would love to have you aboard as our partner in the scientific review process. So remember that reviewers, you can send us a CV and a short description of your expertise so we know how best to deploy your talents once we begin the proposal review process. Yeah, and if you have a question later that comes to mind, or a question you didn't get a chance to ask today, you can always contact us at our program inbox, and we will get back to you very quick. If there aren't any other questions, thank you again.
Thank you all. Thank you, Cadre. Thank you, Jen and Joan. That was great. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing the proposals in the fall.
Thanks, everyone.
Best wishes, everyone.